And now it's my pleasure to invite to the stage Ed Maibach from the George Mason University, where he serves as the Distinguished University Professor and Director of the Center for Climate Change Communication.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. Appreciate that. So climate change is without question, at least according to me, the issue of our time. It is also the story of our time. More and more Americans are becoming more and more concerned about the issue all the time. And yet, there's something paradoxical going on. We've been conducting surveys of the American people every 6 months since 2008, and what we see is that the number of people who are talking about it and who are hearing about the issue in their conversations with their friends and family and coworkers is actually declining. So concern, engagement is increasing, communication is on the decline. And I think that's where we come in. Together, we can turn that around. In our surveys, I think we probably surveyed more than 40,000 people, or a series of representative segments of the population, as I said, every 6 months, so give or take 40, 50,000 people over the past 14 years. And before we ask them any other questions about global warming, we ask this question. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear these words, global warming? Couple of people, tell me what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Polarization.
Polarization, oh, I like that, okay.
Polar bears.
Polar bears, thank you, ma'am.
Ice melting.
Ice melting. Hurricanes. Two more? Oil. People. Okay, this is what we actually hear. Polar bears. Most common response. Plants, penguins, and polar bears. Usually always polar bears. And why is that? Because we see this image, some variant of this image, over and over and over again in climate journalism, okay? It is firmly implanted in people's minds. The second most common reference we hear, something to do with science. This is the Keeling curve. You all recognize that. Rarely do people say the Keeling curve, but they often talk about that, the rising levels of CO2. Abstract notions rooted in science, which is nice, not terribly engaging, just like polar bears, nice, not terribly personally relevant to most people. We hear a lot of this, politics. You referenced it, and the polarization in politics. Also interesting, except almost everybody who references a specific politician, like Al Gore, or then Barack Obama, or then Nancy Pelosi, and most recently Joe Biden, they're usually referencing a politician whose values they feel they do not share. So it's not a positive, engaging reference, it's an off-putting reference. We do hear a lot about extreme weather. We hear that with greater and greater frequency, and that's good, although again, this particular reference to hurricanes is distant from many, if not most, Americans. What we hear relatively less frequently, this is Canal Road. This was my morning commute for 15 years, including the 2 that I was here at GW. What we hear relatively infrequently is people's personal experiences with that extreme weather. We also hear quite frequently, but the fact that many people are aware of global warming in a very or the consequences of global warming in a very mundane way. So here in Washington, obviously our cherry blossoms are our iconic species, and most people here in the area, they understand that the blossoms are coming earlier and earlier. And that's actually good, okay? At least it's an acknowledgement that it is personally relevant. Climate change is changing the conditions in our backyard. What we almost never hear, I am a public health professional first, foremost, and always, what we almost never hear is references to our health, our children's health, our grandchildren's health, our neighbors' health. That is, our research shows, that is a very engaging, top-of-mind reference point. Basically, what we've learned is the more people understand that they have personally experienced global warming, and in ways that are personally relevant, even if mundane, like the earlier blossoming of the cherry blossoms, that is a strong, strong indicator of the fact that they are engaged in the issue, they're thinking about it, they want to know more about it, and they want to know what they can do about it, if anything. So the reality is that most Americans, really since we began our polling project in 2008, have accepted the fact that climate change is real, global warming is real, but they see it as a distant problem. They have historically seen it as a distant problem. They are increasingly coming to understand it as a more and more present and local and personally relevant problem. But still, even though we're making progress on that front, still people see it as distant in time, 2100 maybe, 2050, distant in space, Bangladesh, not Boston, not Washington, D.C., and distant in species. Polar bears for sure, not so much people. This is our opportunity to tell stories that help people recognize that climate change is happening here, now, and to us, to the people and the things that we most value. Of course, there's no such thing as the general public. We talk about the public often, but there's really many different publics out there. In our research, we've identified 6 distinct ways of seeing the issue. We call those 6 groups Global Warming 6 Americas. On the one end of the continuum, the left side of the figure, is a group that we call the alarmed. I'm willing to bet that I'm certainly alarmed. I'm willing to bet every last one of you is alarmed. We are extremely concerned about climate change. We are interested in knowing more about what we can do. Many of us, most of us, are engaged in a variety of different ways to dedicate our lives, either at home or through our careers, to address this problem. On the other end of the spectrum is a group we call the dismissive. They feel just as strongly about the issue, except they've reached the exact equal and opposite conclusion. They believe it's either not real, it's not human-caused, or it isn't serious. The most important thing you need to understand about where people fall on that continuum is their political ideology. Where they are on the progressive to conservative continuum is the strongest factor that puts them, that has led them to be in the interpretive group where they currently are. Think about Fox News versus MSNBC. Just the differences in climate coverage in those 2 news networks tells us a lot about how people got to these 6 groups. People in the alarm segment, they are totally willing to our suggestions about higher impact ways of living that will allow them to align their concerns, their values with solutions. They usually think about individual solutions. I would contend that we want them to think about societal solutions. I don't really care how much people recycle. I do care desperately what people do to support smart climate policy, because that's how we get out of this dilemma that we're in. On the other side of the continuum, the dismissive, frankly, I contend that our greatest gain with them is simply don't piss them off. They are angry, they are loud. Most people think they're about half of America. They're only 1 out of 10 people. That should actually be really reassuring to all of you. We all have a dismissive in our families. We all have a dismissive in our neighborhoods. But they're only 1 out of 10 people. And they are the only 1 out of 10 people who really aren't interested in the facts that we might want to share, because they have their own alt facts that have shaped their worldview. The 4 groups in the middle, they are the ones who see this as a distant issue. We can do incredible service helping them see the ways climate change is already touching their lives and the things they love. So the 1 group, the alarmed, we want to activate them with actions that will make a difference. The 4 groups in the middle, we want to help them understand that this is a proximal, this is a here now us problem. And the 1 group at the end, the dismissive, we just don't want to piss them off. But there's hope there. I'm going to actually give you hope. The science of science communication, of human communication at all, has taught us that the way that every public communication campaign in human history, all the way back to Aristotle and to today, has succeeded. Every successful human communication campaign has succeeded on the basis of simple, clear messages repeated often by a variety of trusted and caring voices. I would offer you Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, as a perfect case study of a man who really deeply understands the importance of this formula for successful communication. You may not share his values. I would contend you probably don't, but that doesn't matter. The point is, this is the formula that works. Our research has shown that people's understanding of climate change, it doesn't have to be, they don't have to become climate scientists to care deeply. The people who care deeply understand 6 key truths. It's real, it's us, experts agree, it's bad, it's harming things that we care about, there's hope, there are actions we can take, and finally, there's other people care. If you are concerned about climate change, you are not in the minority, although most people who care about climate change feel they are in the minority because they're not hearing about the issue on the news, in conversation with their friends, families, and coworkers. It's pretty darn simple. These are the key ideas that help to engage people. But really it comes down to the trust in the messenger, whether people are seen as trustworthy and whether they are seen as caring. And this is a question that we asked in our survey a year ago, spring 2022. We asked, how much do you trust each of the following as a source of information about global warming? I've highlighted you all of us actually, in our role as friends and family. Okay, I have a role as a health professional. I have a role as a climate expert. With regard to the whole population, my role as a climate scientist, I am slightly less trusted than my role as a friend and a family member. And many of you who are still in school, you don't yet have that expertise to fall back on. You're developing expertise and you will continue to do so, but every one of us has that role as trusted and caring friend and family member. And look over at the far side, the right-hand side of this slide. Who do conservative Republicans trust the most? Well, bam, that's us, right? They trust us the most because they don't trust the experts on this issue. So every single person in this room has an opportunity to not only not piss off the dismissive, but to actually share with the dismissive how concerned you are and your hopes for a better future and how specific things that we can do as a society will allow us to get to that better future. So every one of us in this room is an incredibly important voice in changing the dynamics that are currently so fraught in America on the issue of climate change. As a health professional, this is the simple, clear message that I'm putting most of my time in sharing with my fellow health professionals. I was raised at a time, I was raised as a public health professional at a time when we thought that tobacco was the public health enemy #1. And most of my health professional colleagues still think tobacco is public health enemy #1. But in fact, fossil fuels are creating much more human carnage than tobacco is, and will, going forward, it is likely to get much worse unless we address the elephant in the room, and that is that our climate and our health share a common enemy. And that enemy is the product that we call fossil fuels. So I'm just going to leave you with this mantra of mine, simple, clear messages, repeated often through your trusted and caring voices. That is your opportunity. That is our opportunity to break the climate silence in America. And ultimately, the thing we most need to do is reunite the left and the right in recognizing, acknowledging this as a problem, and looking for the best path forward. Thank you all.
That's awesome. By the way, so one of the folks we're going to hear later today is a colleague of yours, Bob Inglis, who runs something called Republic EN. And he was a Republican conservative congressman from South Carolina and a climate denier. And you know who flipped him?
His 18-year-old son, Robbie Inglis, now an emergency room doctor in Providence, Rhode Island.
All right, so we have a couple minutes to take a couple questions for our speaker here, who is such an expert on public opinion. Anybody want to open it up? Right over here. Stan, introduce yourself, tell us where you come from, and fire away.
Hi, I'm Spencer. I come from a SUNY ESF, and I'm just curious with the indifferent group. So what does it mean for them to be indifferent? Do they believe in climate change, just don't care, don't think it's a problem? Like, where does that actually stand? Should we try to convince them, or what's
It's a great question. Thank you, Stuart. Most of the indifferent, they accept the fact that the climate is changing. They even accept the fact that human action is, at least in part, responsible for that. And by human action, I mean burning fossil fuels and tearing down and burning the world's forests. But they, as I said before, they see it as a distant problem, and they have today's problems. They're trying to get their kids to school on time. They're trying to get healthy lunches made, and that their kids will actually eat and not toss in the bin. And that they're trying to get to work on time. So people's daily concerns will trump their distant concerns. And so ultimately, the way we succeed is showing people this is actually touching your lives in a whole variety of different ways that you may not have been aware of, but that you do not like.
I want to ask you about trusted sources for a second, because it's really important. How many of you have done a story for Planet Forward, have contributed a story? All right. Now let me see the rest of the hands in the room. How many of you plan to do a story for Planet Forward? Okay, so whether you're doing it or not, if you're applying for a grant or whatever, and you got a pitch, you got to tell a story, you're going to quote a source, you're going to quote a piece of data. So what constitutes a trusted source when you're talking to people maybe who are in the middle?
Yeah, okay, great. So one of the first rules of finding trusted voices is make sure that they are not signaling, either overtly or covertly, that they are the other. Like they are not part of your political tribe. They're not part of your tribe, which more and more in America means your political tribe. So I spend a lot of time with health professionals, with climate scientists. We've seen that they are trusted sources, but if they stand up, health professionals have, I went past it, I didn't call it out, but health professionals, my primary care doctor was the #2 most trusted source among conservative Republicans. Friends and family was the #1 most trusted source. So I spend a lot of time coaching doctors to talk about this issue, but for God's sakes, please don't signal the fact that you are a political liberal when you do that, because you completely undermine your credibility. So bringing your compassion, your caring, showing that you're worried, that's good enough. Just don't try to shove all of your other, I'm going to say it, liberal causes down the dismissive's throat while you're trying to engage with them.
That feels too many like a finger wag or a lecture or political.
Right.
Another question from the floor. How about over here on this side? Going once, going twice. Yes.
Thank you.
Stan, tell us who you are, where you're from.
Thank you. My name is Paul Leone. I'm from George Washington University. I'm a sophomore here studying environmental science. And I'm wondering how these dynamics change when you're having a conversation with someone who is an older individual, say 65 years old, has done a lot relatively older.
Older.
I got it. Okay.
In the sense where they have done a lot of their own research, they've had a lot of experiences throughout their own lives, and you're approaching them as someone who's young, just learning about the issues. And if they are so ingrained in their own worldview and way of thinking, then how do you even start breaking that barrier
Great
when
question.
you're making your own?
Yeah. So I'll just personify your older person as a cranky uncle. My colleague John Cook he talks about how he teaches us how to debunk the myths that our cranky uncles have been misled into believing. And the most important way to get through to your cranky Uncle Ed is, frankly, just to start with how concerned you are about the problem. And cranky Uncle Ed is going to come right back at you with all kinds of misinformation. And if you love one another, and I hope you do love one another, he's going to be patient enough for you to actually show him. He shows you his sources, you show him your sources. You're not going to really change him, at least not the first 10 times you try, but you eventually might actually get him to recognize that the people that he loves are really deeply concerned about this. And he will become concerned about your well-being, even if he's not concerned about the changing global climate. And that really is the way in with our cranky uncles. Show them that we care about them, and show them that we care about this issue. By extension, our research actually shows really clearly that kind of interpersonal communication dynamic helps to open up the minds of even people whose minds have been long since closed on this issue, because they are the victims of a misinformation campaign, an incredibly sustained, patient, well-funded, highly prominent misinformation campaign. So if you keep that in mind, they are victims too, it allows me to actually keep my compassion open to them, because I really do feel they are victims, just as we are all victims to the fossil fuel industry's sustained disinformation, misinformation.
Two points. You're not cranky.
Not right now.
Second thing, I hope you're here with us this afternoon, because that's a question that will be very much part of what Bob Inglis will talk about.
Yes.
Okay, before we let you go, because we want to move on to the next thing here, I wasn't a math major, but I did the math, and very concerned, you're alarmed, concerned. What were the three top things of your 6 Americas?
Alarmed, concerned, cautious.
Alarmed, concerned, cautious. That adds up to 70%. Okay, that's 70%. So that's not what you're saying. The good news here is that the vast majority of people are aware of and at least concerned or cautious about climate change.
Even better, 9 out of 10 people really do have open minds and open hearts to learn about this issue. It's just the 1 out of 10 who really are, the cranky uncles who have pre-baked misinformation in them, and they're not really open to listening.
So one pointer for everybody to take away: you want to communicate in the story you write to a broad public. You want to talk to your cranky uncle. You want to write a science grant. What's one takeaway from what you know about how people should portray what they're trying to do?
Well, so I want to come back to your earlier question about trusted experts. Numbers numb, stories sell, right? So the experts, we tend to put a lot of numbers out there, and that often doesn't really penetrate. When people approach the numbers because they want to know, they're willing to spend the energy to process it. But if you want to actually start a conversation, tell a powerful story, a story that illustrates the numbers, but that is not based in numbers.
Ed Maibach, thank you so much.
My pleasure.